Thanks, Angela. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And as questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and Angela can interrupt me. I will be running the presentation, so I won't necessarily see all the chat communication. So we're going to just go through the survey as it is laid out on FormStack, which is the application we're using to collect the data for the 2020 Privacy Assessment Survey. I've started us off on the communications page of the OCIO website, because that's where you will go to find the actual survey. So just a couple of introductory remarks. The Privacy Assessment Survey is on this page, and there's also a PDF version of the survey. So the reason for that is one of the early questions or comments I got after we posted the survey on the 10th of August was that it was difficult for one person to complete. And so I just want to make sure everybody is aware that it's not anticipated, unless you're in a very small agency, that one person would be able to answer all the questions. And so particularly for larger agencies, the PDF version might be useful in order to share and assign out certain questions for answers and that type of a thing. So you may be working with IT security, or you may be working with your communication shop, or your public records, or legal or risk, or some other areas in your departments. And so that is why the PDF version was created. And then the PDF version also has sort of the choose your own adventure for how you answer questions. So if you answer a certain way, different questions populate, and so it does display every single question that's asked. So you know what to expect if you answer a certain way instead of having to do it in the survey. So with that said, the survey link is also on this page here under Privacy Assessment Survey. I've already clicked on it, so I'm just going to switch over to where the actual survey is. And this is the introduction page. And just to start off, I wanted to make sure everybody understands the purpose of the assessment survey is really for the Office of Privacy and Data Protection to determine the maturity of privacy practices within the state of Washington. And it's not being used to measure compliance with laws or standards. It's really just our way of assessing where we're at as a state, so that our office can determine the best way to move forward as an enterprise in terms of providing resources and what other services may be useful for state agencies. So if you come across questions that you feel like you're not answering in a way that makes you feel good about yourself, it's okay if you don't have some of these things, because there's a lot of agencies that don't have these things, and that's what we're trying to gauge to see what we can help. So that's just the introduction. So the first page is going to be where you put in your information. So I'm just gonna make up an agency here. There is an agency code list on the OFM website. So I'm just gonna make up a number. It will auto-populate because I've done this before here, but you put in the person that's actually gonna submit it, you go ahead and put in your name and your email address. So this first question is really a screening question, and there are agencies that don't actually collect any personal information for Washington residents. And we are making a distinction here for Washington residents, because all agencies are going to have personal information regarding their employees, but we're really focusing here on whether or not you're collecting personal information for Washington residents. So if your agency doesn't collect those information and you say no, then you click the no radial and then go to next. And that will just take you immediately to the end of the form. And then you don't have to complete the survey. Most agencies probably are not going to be clicking no, but this way It's a very quick screening method, and then we have a record of your assessment, and we know that you don't collect Washington resident information. But for purposes for today, I'm going to click yes, and then that's going to take me into the actual survey questions. So the survey is broken up into 9 different sections, and so the first section here is, after the agency information, is the types of personal information that you collect. And so this is a list. It's pretty comprehensive, but there may be other types of information that we missed. So that's what the other box is here, and you can click that and fill in other personal information that you think should be captured here. Otherwise, you just go ahead and click on all the ones that apply to your agency. I would say for other unique identifiers, an example of this is I came from the Department of Social and Health Services, and we created client IDs for all of our clients. So I would consider that to be a unique identifier. And you can just go ahead and click everything that applies to your agency that you collect. I do have biometrics here, and just as a quick, there is another biometrics question as well later in the survey. I just wanted to, for your reference, I did pull up the RCW. I'll just click quickly over here for the definition that we're looking for, which is RCW 375.010 is where you would find the definition if you're not sure what we mean by biometric identifier. So back to the survey. So the next question is, how does your agency collect information? So you would just select all the ways that you get information. I'm just going to randomly select, and if there's one that's not here, go ahead and fill out in the other box. This is the biometric identifier question. So this is one or the other, so it doesn't open up any other new boxes or anything. So this is also another law here for the has your agency taken steps to comply with the Keep Washington Working Act. So if you don't have a lot of familiarity with this law, the Attorney General's office has a really great webpage here, and I'll just go there quickly. This is, it's FAQ for law enforcement, but it actually, I think, is a very comprehensive explanation for other agencies as well. And there's not just one RCW where the law is captured, and so that's why I didn't just list an RCW, but this page for the Attorney General's office at atg.wa.gov is where I would go to familiarize yourself with this law if you're not already familiar. So a lot of agencies are already saying we're just compliant with this law. Great. And then, does your agency use privacy impact assessments? If you say no, there's no further questions. But if you say yes, then we just ask that you, type in what you use. So at DSHS, we did HIPAA security risk assessment. So the next section is privacy roles and staffing, and Matt's going to talk about this section.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katie. And I'm getting a little feedback. Does it sound okay on your end?
It's better now.
Okay, great. So this section is really intended just to kind of measure what types of resources are out there in our agencies to work on privacy issues, and how understand how they're allocated across the agency. So the first question here, we're asking people to really just pick the best option of how privacy issues are handled, and this range from having a specific person designated to set policy, all the way down to not having staff with expertise or internal staff, but calling outside experts when necessary. And one thing you may have noticed about this question is it's a little different from what we had in the past. In the past, we had an other option, and what we were really finding was that almost everybody was choosing other, but then describing something that fit pretty neatly into one of the given options. So we're really challenging people to just pick the best one here. And then the second question here kind of piggybacks off of that, and the reason we're asking it again is because you get some different options depending on what you select. So if you do have a person designated to set policy and handle privacy questions, we'd like to know who that person is to make sure that we have the right roster of people that we should be working with and reaching out to, and make sure that those people are included in our events and groups. And then if you, and the other thing on there is there was the question at the bottom, thanks Katie, about what other positions work on privacy issues. So there we're just looking for a more general description of, yes, even if you have a specific person, we know that they're not the only ones working on this. So who else in the agency has a privacy role? So as Katie's typing out at DSHS, they had privacy coordinators out in their administrations, and those would be examples of people who aren't the officially designated person, but do have a role in privacy. And if you select no, then we're just asking for, again, a general description of if you don't have a specific person, what types of people do you have? What types of roles do you have that work on privacy? So going on to the next section, this is training and policies. So this is a section that's really measuring the maturity of policies and training. And so we've already covered how or whether you have a specific person that handles this. And now we're moving on to, even if that person has a really strong knowledge of what they should and shouldn't do, how well are other people in the agency being put in a position to succeed, and how well is that information being spread across the agency? So the first question is whether you have formal policies and procedures that address privacy. It's just a yes, no, or other. This next question is asking, it's kind of a subset of that. It's asking whether you have formal policies or procedures or some other type of standard that addresses particularly sensitive subsets of information. So the things that we've called out here are, I guess we haven't actually, okay. If you select yes, you'll see this second question pop up that has examples of what we mean by particularly sensitive subsets of information. So it could be that the information is particularly sensitive, like substance use disorder, or it could be that the population of people that the information is about is particularly sensitive, like participants in the address confidentiality program that's run out of the Secretary of State, or immigration information. Okay, going on to the next question is about whether you have a formal policy to minimize data collection, use, and disclosure. So again, this is just a subset of that first question of, okay, you have formal policies and procedures. Do you have a specific policy that talks about data minimization? And then the last question is just what type of privacy training is offered to employees. And it ranges here from whether there's specific privacy training for your agency or generic privacy training. And then it also talks about whether the training is mandatory or just offered and made available. So this is one where you want to check all that apply. And if you do have training, you're probably going to be checking at least a couple of boxes, because you're going to be talking about whether it is generic or agency specific, and then you're also going to be talking about whether it is mandatory or not.
Thanks, Matt. And then I was just going to add one more thing that I noted on the last presentation that I did about this, is that at DSHS, we didn't have a standalone policy that had to do with data minimization, but there was data minimization parts of that policy. And so I would answer yes to that question, even though it wasn't called a data minimization policy. It required data minimization as a part of our overall privacy training. Is there a question?
Yes, Daniel has his hand up. Go ahead, Daniel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my CIO is the one who actually received this invite, but I have not received anything from this. I'm the privacy officer for the lottery. Is this coming out anywhere else, or the survey specifically?
So I think our distribution list was for the CIOs, CISOs, and then the privacy officers that we had on the state.
Right, I'm the CISO and
Okay.
the privacy officer.
Okay, so anybody can access the survey from the communications page that I was on initially. Is that where you're is that what you're asking? How to access the survey?
How to access it, because I have not received that link at all.
Okay, so yeah, it's on ocio.wa.gov/communications.
Okay.
So that's just on the public internet, and then you can go to the privacy assessment survey and it will take you to the survey.
All right, thank you. Sorry about interrupting.
Oh, no, that's not a problem.
So I have another question in the chat box. Does the OCIO offer privacy training that agencies can use to provide staff? We've done a few.
So yes, we do have some privacy training, and we do have a data breach training that has been loaded into LMS. But that is one of the, I guess, mandates for this office is to offer privacy training. So if there's somebody, I don't see who asked the question, but I'm happy to talk with you offline about what other options there may be. And then there's also privacy training that's just offered by agencies depending on the type of data they handle as well. So that's what we're trying to get at when we're asking about the privacy training. So the next section is on transparency. And the first question is, do you have a website privacy policy that addresses information you track or gather on your website? So this is something that I want to clarify because I've seen some different answers on to this question that I think leads me to believe that it's not as clear as it could be. So most agencies have a privacy policy on their agency's website. So if you went out to, say, Office of Administrative Hearings website or the military department's website, that you would scroll down to the bottom and you would see something that's called the privacy policy. And when you click on that, it usually leads you to a policy that talks about how cookies are stored and how information will be used by the website in terms of visiting the website. So that's what we mean by a website privacy policy. So the next question is asking about if you have an external facing privacy notice or policy that explains how you collect, use, or disclose personal information. And so this is actually something that's closer to what's often called a notice of privacy practices. And so this is probably more common for healthcare agencies to have because they're required to have this by HIPAA, but it's distinct from a website privacy policy. So that's something that I wanted to clarify between these two questions. So I think that if you answer yes to the external facing privacy notice, then the follow-up questions are how you provide that to people. And I will tell you at DSHS, we did it through all these methods. And so I would check all of those. So if you answer no, then there's just no follow-up question. So, and then the next set of questions is about individual participation. And this gets at whether or not you have policies or procedures that address the person's request to control their personal information. So if you answer yes, there's a lot of different rights that are sometimes afforded to people, especially again in the healthcare area, I believe also in the educational area, regarding rights to receive their information, correct information, delete information, And if you have policies or procedures that offer all these, that's great. And you just click what applies. And if you don't, then you just say no, and then there's no follow-up questions. So the next session is accountability. I think Matt's going over this.
Sure. So this accountability section is mostly about incidents. And I want to clarify right at the beginning and just call out that obviously we don't want incidents. We don't want people's personal information to be compromised. But I think people are also, this is a question that scares people because there's concerns about it being published, that there was some breach. It's just a scary word, right? And I want to just assure everybody that we are fully aware that incidents are a normal part of having a privacy program. In fact, if you do have a lot of personal information, it's very likely that you probably should have at least some type of incident, whether it rises to the level of breach or not. And it can be a sign of health too, to indicate that you have the right controls in place to identify incidents when they do come up. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that and give you that talking point so that if you are a little scared about this, or if there are others in your agency that are scared about admitting this, that we understand that this is a normal part of having a functioning privacy program. So the first question is just about whether you yourself have had an incident in the past year. And when we say incident, I should clarify that we're talking about an unauthorized use or disclosure, regardless of whether it rises to the level of requiring notification. So you could have an incident where something is shared or disclosed that shouldn't have been, but that you ultimately determine was not actually a breach that required notification. And that's what we mean by the term incident. The next question is about whether you have any third parties that you share data with that have experienced a data incident in the past year. And then after that, we're talking about what controls your agency has in place to identify and respond to data incidents. So there's a lot of different things you could have. I'm sure that this list is not exhaustive, but we're talking about things like who's authorized to make a breach determination, any policies and procedures, training requirements, and then also things like whether you have automated system monitoring or insurance to cover any breaches that do occur.
Matt, I have a question here from Hannah.
Sure.
Is the breach notification notification to affected parties or notification to OCIO?
So it could be both. I'm thinking of it in the broader sense of notification under a breach notification law, which would be separate from notice to OCIO. So like under 4256-590, if there is a confirmed breach, you have to notify the individuals affected and possibly the Attorney General's office. And then there are other breach notification laws that apply to other types of information like healthcare information. So that's kind of the broader sense that we mean breach.
Okay, thanks.
This next question that Katie just highlighted is, are you subject to other breach notifications other than 4256-590, which is our state law that applies to state agencies? And so if you select yes, there's an option to list what those are. And we gave a couple of examples like HIPAA for healthcare information. Social Security Administration has its own standards. And then there's some standards under Gramm-Leach-Bliley. I'm sure this is not all of them. So if you do have other notification requirements, we're interested in understanding what those are. And then the last question is just a pretty basic question about security controls. And that question is whether you have physical safeguards, which would be things like key card access, technical safeguards, which would be things like encryption, and then administrative safeguards, which would be things like policies and procedures. let's go. Yeah. Okay. So data sharing, third-party management, and data publishing. So we've now shifted into questions about how information is disclosed outside of your agency. So the first question is just to check all the boxes of the different types of agencies or different types of people that receive your information. I wanted to call out there are two different law enforcement boxes, and that's because we know that there are agencies that have kind of a formal data sharing relationship with law enforcement where there may even be a contract and regular system access, and we want to distinguish that from requests from law enforcement on an ad hoc basis. Like if you get a public disclosure request and comes along with a warrant and you're releasing information in just that one instance. The next question is about whether your agency sells personal information. And here, if you select yes, we have a question about what the authorizing statute is that directs or authorizes you to sell the data. And then the next question is how new requests are vetted. So this is another kind of check all that apply question about controls. And we understand there's going to be a lot of variance from agency to agency, but these are just some of the examples that we've seen implemented. And then the last question, or I guess it's not the last question, the next question is which elements are part of your agency's data sharing agreements. So this is another check all that apply, and I would say just be inclusive on this. We understand that some agencies have different versions of data sharing language. So if some of these are in some of your contracts but not others, I think it would be fair to just go ahead and include those here. And then the last question is a little different because rather than talking about data sharing with third parties in like the sense of sensitive information, or really talking about publishing data. And so here we're talking about whether you have standards in place to minimize the risk of people being re-identified when you publicly disclose information or publish it in a dashboard or something like that. And again, these are just a couple of the examples of controls that we know are in place out there. The next section is on data inventory, retention, and destruction. So the first two questions here are about data mapping or inventorying. The first one is whether your agency has a data map or inventory of systems and applications. And then the second one is very similar, but actually whether there's an inventory of data or information that's stored outside of systems and applications. So we know that there are a lot of places where the original source of data may be in a system, but then it's taken and saved in other locations to be worked on or for a variety of reasons. And so we're asking if there's an inventory of where those other locations are. The next question is when was your last records inventory, which is a function of your public records officer, and we have the RCW cited there where that requirement comes from. And then the last one is just a pretty general question about records retention and what steps your agency has to delete old data and how that responsibility is allocated.
Thanks, Matt. Also, I would say the records inventory is sometimes just done by the records officer as well. So next section is future planning. And this is something I did want to point out because I've seen some agencies submit assessments already, and they don't realize that this is a scale here. And so I feel like we're getting a lot of ones, which might not be accurate. Maybe we should have had the default as 10 to emphasize the importance. But so just so you know, it's a scale, so you can kind of rate on how important it is to your agency for the upcoming year. And then whether or not privacy has become more of a priority or important to your agency. over the last few years, if it's increased, decreased, or stayed about the same. And then the next question is, what privacy tasks is your agency planning to work on in the next year? So these are some options, or if you have other ones, or if there's not anything, you can click the other and put that in as well. And then I will note, as we've been going through the questions, you will have noticed that there's a red asterisk. These are next to the questions that are required to be answered. And so we have some free form text here for these next 3 questions for developments or resources or training that we're looking for information about, but they're not required if you don't have answers for these questions. So I will say that once we get to the next slide, like with several other types of forms, I purposely didn't answer one of the questions on the last one just to demonstrate when you try to submit the form, it's not going to let me because there were some questions I didn't answer. So it will go back to the questions that I failed to answer, and we'll let you know which ones you need to go back to. And then also there's the option if you're not, if you've done part of this and then realize you forgot to answer one because you didn't have the answer and you need to go find somebody and talk to them about it, you can always save and resume it for later. And I'm not going to completely do this because it will take me out of the survey as we're in it right now, but it will save the survey and get a link, and then you'll need to input your email address in order to get that link. So I'm not going to do that, but that is a feature that's nice if you aren't able to complete the privacy assessment all in one sitting, which I will say was an issue for me. When I was doing it for DSHS, I didn't do the entire assessment in one sitting. And so that's nice to be able to come back and have your work and answers saved. So we'll take you to where you forgot to answer the questions. You can go through and answer all the questions. I would say also at the end, there's one more box that is a type of a fail-safe to if you submit and didn't mean to submit, which is this box right here. So you need to click, I am ready to submit this form, just to make sure you don't submit it before you mean to. If that does happen and you end up submitting survey results that you didn't mean to, you can also contact us and let us know. And then we can make sure that we know that you're going to submit a different survey. And then there's also comments about, the use of the form and that type of a thing. So I think that's everything that we plan to cover on the walkthrough. We're actually wrapping up a little bit sooner than we did last time, but are there other questions that have come in, or any other questions about the form or the process, or what next steps are?
I don't have any questions in the chat.
Okay, I will let you know that several agencies did complete this. This has been in law since 2016, and several agencies have completed surveys. So if you did one in 2019 and you're not sure who did it or what it said, you can send a request to myself, or you can send it to the privacy@ocio.wa.gov email address and request your agency's survey from last year. Some of the questions are a little bit different, but there is some overlap as well. But I think for agencies that don't remember, don't have the institutional memory about what was done last year, it might be helpful to get that information if your agency completed one. The other part I wanted to say about how we're going to use this data is, as I said in the beginning, we're collecting it to kind of gauge privacy assessment and maturity, or privacy maturity across the state and the enterprise, and that we plan to create a report based on the information we gather but we won't be naming agencies in that report regarding how they answered. We'll say, 20% of agencies have a privacy policy, or 50% of agencies do training, or something to that effect, just to help provide some information to some of the legislators, especially that I think have had interest in this area, but also to the governor's office and the cabinet agencies and that type of a thing that have an interest in some of those statistics. So that's why I would encourage you to be as, honest and transparent and as you can in the survey, so we can really get a good idea of where we're at as a state. So if there's no other questions that came in, I think that might be everything we have to cover today. So there will be a recording there. This was recorded, and so if you know of people that you think should go through this walkthrough, we will have the presentation posted on the website, hopefully in a couple days. And the other note I wanted to say was that don't wait until September 30th to do the survey. I think you could probably gauge from all the questions today that it's not something that can be done quickly, and so, or in one sitting. So I would encourage you to kind of get in there to chew on some of the questions so that you can figure out who else in your organization you may need to reach out to try and answer the questions as comprehensively as possible. So thanks all for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you. Oh, and I'm sorry, I do have one more thing to say. You will get a copy of your survey sent to you automatically after you complete the survey, and it will be emailed to the address that's input in the agency information section. So your answers will be automatically sent to you for the 2020 assessment. And that's the last thing I think I need to say.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Goodbye.